turn to the Middle East, and there have been developments in ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, with both sides continuing to review proposals. Egyptian mediators have arrived in Israel, and local media are reporting there's been notable progress in finding common ground. In Gaza itself, the Hamas-run health ministry says at least 50 people have been killed in Israeli attacks over the past 24 hours. This was the scene in Rafah on Friday night. The BBC has learned that British troops could be deployed on the ground in Gaza to help deliver aid via a new sea route. Aid would be delivered from Cyprus on large ships before being transferred into trucks and smaller landing craft. The floating causeway would be several hundred meters long and anchored firmly into the sand. The United States has decided not to put American boots on the ground. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landell is following the developments from Jerusalem.
Well, this week, Catherine, the American Defense Department gave a long briefing to media in America about how this new maritime aid corridor would work. But there was a big hole in the plans, and that's because the United States has made it very clear they are not going to put US boots on the ground in Gaza. They are not going to drive those aid trucks off the landing craft onto the floating pontoon or causeway when it's established and onto the beach into a secure zone on the beach in Gaza. So someone's going to have to do that. The Americans said an unnamed third party would do it. They said it would be a significant partner of the United States, a nation, not some private military company. And my understanding is that one option being considered by the British government is that British troops would drive those trucks. Now, I should be very clear, no decision has been made. The issue has not yet reached the Prime Minister's desk. The MOD is not commenting, nor is the Israeli army. But the British have been very closely involved in this operations planning from the very beginning, both in American headquarters in Florida and also in Cyprus. A British ship is going to be used as a dormitory for hundreds of American servicemen and women involved. And even the British Hydrographic Office has been giving detailed information to the planners about the nature of Gaza's shoreline. So it is a possibility, it is an option that British forces will drive those trucks onto the beach in Gaza in harm's way, but it is just an option. No decision has been taken.
And James, looking at the situation in Gaza, we're hearing of notable progress in terms of mediation talks between Israel and Hamas. Do we have any detail on how those talks are proceeding?
Well, look, I'm always cautious about being hopeful and disappointed and progress and stalled in these kind of negotiations because they're just long and difficult. What we do know is that the talking is continuing. Egyptian officials were here in Jerusalem yesterday. We know that Hamas overnight has said that they have received the latest Israeli proposal. We know that there's a big conference taking place in Saudi Arabia this weekend under the aegis of the World Economic Forum, and there's a possibility of some parties talking to each other in the sidelines of that conference. I think the idea is that there is going to be another attempt to see if a deal is possible for a ceasefire, for some hostages to be released, for some Palestinian prisoners to be released before any military operation begins in Rafah in the south of Gaza against Hamas fighters that Israel says are holed up there in tunnels. So it's another attempt to try and make some progress. We'll see whether it does, because thus far it's been very, very difficult for both sides to try to bridge the divide.
The BBC's James Landell in Jerusalem. Well, let's speak to Chris Parry, a former British Royal Navy officer. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. How would an operation like this work?
Well, what we have to imagine is that the coastline of Gaza doesn't have any port facilities. And so if anybody can remember what D-Day was like, we have Mulberry harbours and we have piers and pontoons that were leading from deep water into the shallow zone and also the shore. And what this is called by the Americans is called Joint Logistics Over the Shore, JLOTS. It's essentially a floating pier that enables you to put heavy trucks and also other loads ashore from ships that can only go into deep water.
And there'll be real questions about the safety of any troops that would take part in an operation like this. How would their safety be guaranteed?
Well, during the construction of this pontoon pier, people are going to stay in Royal Fleet Auxiliary Cardigan Bay, which is a 15,000-ton auxiliary ship that works for the Royal Navy. I think we've heard already that a third party is going to be driving these trucks. I sincerely hope it isn't British troops. We know that there's endemic criminality in Gaza itself, which dominates all aid and supplies that are going in. And I suspect the interface would best be served by an Arab country rather than any British troops going ashore. So I suspect we're going to be limited to doing what is offshore, and the truck driving and all the other things are best placed amongst those who understand the local culture and can deal with it.
And as we've seen, obviously, during the course of the war in Gaza, there is the possibility of mistakes, as happened with the aid workers with the World Central Kitchen. Do you think that will be a factor in the government's decision in this? And what are the consequences if there is a mistake and British troops are injured?
Well, as I said, I don't think British troops will be involved. So I think there'll be clear.
But if they're on the ground in Gaza, there's a potential for anything to happen.
They won't be. That's my point. I think they'll be offshore on the installation, and that'll be clearly demarcated. So the Israelis know that. I don't think the Israelis or anybody else is going to be deliberately attacking the pontoon or the aid supplies offshore unless they intend to do so. And I think there'll be instant retribution on anybody who tries to do that.